We are at the Kentucky State University Environmental Education and Research Center. At this center we have a vast array of plants, more than 500 species of vascular plants. We have a beautiful parade of wildflowers that spans the visual spectrum. It begins in late February to early March with hepatica and harbinger of spring, spring beauty, and then we move into to the summer wildflowers, and usually the summer wildflowers are accompanied by a beautiful array of butterflies. And from that we go into the late summer flowers and early fall flowers, which are dominated by asters. And then it is all culminated with a beautiful show by the witch hazel. The parade then pauses for a short period of time to start all over again. Most of these early summer flowers have annual synchrony. That means that each species will be blooming within a certain time period, and this facilitates the process of cross-pollination. And this year we have two really unusual events happening. One is with the synchronous flowering of the American Columbo, Frasera caroliniensis. And we don't know how long it takes before it blooms. There's still a lot we don't know about it, but it probably takes anywhere from 25 to 75 years for the plant to mature. And then once the plants get mature, they don't bloom, because if they were to bloom when they get mature and bloom one time, then there would not be enough plants blooming at one time to get good cross-pollination. The American Columbo is what we call a monocarpic perennial that blooms. It means it blooms one time and then it dies. So it doesn't bloom every year. It doesn't bloom as soon as it gets mature. Harbinger spring has annual synchrony because they all bloom within a predictable time slot each year. And so that gets good cross-pollination. While if you had a plant like it's a monocarpic that's long-lived, and if they were to bloom just as soon as they got mature, you would scatter, these plants out over 25 to 75 years, and there wouldn't be hardly any blooming at any one period in time, not close enough to pollinate. While if you have synchrony, where you get several age classes, like 10, 15-year age classes in there at the same time, then you're going to have enough blooming in an area like this. It don't mean all of them are going to bloom at that time, but it means it's several age classes, not one age class, but a number of age classes. And if we look at the American Columbo, there's a lot of features about it that are outstanding. One, it's a very tall plant. As you can see, it's about as tall as I am. They can go up to 7 or sometimes even 8 feet tall. And you can see by all the number of seeds that would be on this plant, how much energy it would use just to produce all of those seeds. And having all these flowers bunched together really helps to attract pollinators. And of course, being tall makes it visible and attractive from a far distance away. It also, the nectar pads in the flowers they release a pretty good odor. You can smell them for some distance. It's kind of a sweet odor if you smell them. And if you were to count these flowers, you would find that on each one of these little branches, there are actually 10 to 12 flowers. And then there's swirls of leaves, usually in 4. This one has 5. Sometimes they do have 5. And the number of little flowering branches on the panicle are the same as the number of leaves. So if you multiply that out, you can have over 500-600 flowers on this one plant at one time, which is a lot of flowers. And also the flowers are very unusual. They're really attractive to pollinators because they have a nectar pad right in the center of each petal. Different types of pollinators come to. And We don't know for sure what the primary pollinator is. From our observations, it appears that bumblebees are probably the most frequent pollinator of the American Columbo. As I said before, is a monocarpic perennial. It lives a long time. We don't know for sure how long it takes for it to bloom. It's hard to study because people cannot just go out anytime they want to and study it because all these events are not happening. Now, we don't know for sure how long it takes it to get mature, but once it gets mature, it does not bloom like the annual synchronous blooming of most of our annual flowers or other perennials. Most of the perennials that we have in the early springtime, they bloom in a relatively predictable time period. And these, it's not predictable. We don't know when it's going to happen. So that's one reason there's a lot of things we don't know about these plants. If you look, this one has 5 leaflets in a rosette. They normally have 4, but 5 is not uncommon. In each leaflet there's a flower and stem comes out. And each one of those has anywhere from 10 to 12 flowers. On some of them there's actually a secondary stem that comes out, and it has a smaller number of flowers. So like on this, each whorl of these leaves are probably going to have like 50 flowers, or maybe even more than that. And if you count that you've got 9 or 10 whorls going up, that's a lot of flowers. So it's going to produce a lot of seeds. It's going to start the new plants like the small one you see here. And then, as I said before, it exists in that stage for anywhere from 25 to 75 years. Nobody really knows. And it's very similar to what we see in the woods bunch flower, except the woods bunch flower does not die back after it blooms. It can come back again and bloom again. And the woods bunch flower doesn't usually have a longer period, but there is a synchronous blooming. Now, we don't know on the American Columbo what really signals it's time for them all to bloom at one time. That's a big enigma, and that's something that needs to be studied. On the woods bunch flower, we think that it may be associated with drought conditions. American Columbo, its habitat where it likes to live is in what we would call a dry upland forest, and that's what we're in here. And it goes from a dry upland forest to a mesic forest. And if you go just a few feet from where we are into the ravine that's close to us, we move from a dry upland forest to a mesic forest. And when we move to the mesic forest, the American Columbo no longer grows there, and it grows more, and we get more of the woods bunch flower. And this transition happens in a matter of just a few feet. Now, I might mention there are 2 flowers that in the immature stage that can be confused with American Columbo. Comfrey, when it's young, will look a lot like the American Columbo, but a comfrey, if you look at the leaves real close, the leaves are fuzzy, while the leaves on the American Columbo are very smooth and shiny. And then the other one that can be confused with it is woods bunch flower. All 3 of these have these basal rosettes of leaves, but the woods bunch flower, the leaves are kind of pleated, and instead of being smooth like this. This is a very unusual event, and we're very fortunate that we had an opportunity to see it this year. This isn't something you have an opportunity to see all that often.